What happens when a beloved talk show host pushes too far and a royal guest decides he's had enough? The studio lights were blazing, the audience was settled, and nobody could have predicted what was about to unfold on what should have been routine celebrity interview. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think about celebrities walking off live television. The evening started like any other on The Jonathan Ross Show. Prince Harry had arrived at the studio looking relaxed, even jovial, greeting crew members with his characteristic warmth. The pre-interview chat had gone smoothly, with Harry discussing his recent charitable endeavors and upcoming projects. Everything seemed perfectly normal as they took their positions on the famous sofa. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome His Royal Highness Prince Harry," Jonathan announced with his trademark enthusiasm, his voice carrying that familiar hint of mischief that regular viewers knew so well. Harry walked out to thunderous applause, waving to the audience with genuine appreciation. He settled into the plush red sofa, adjusting his jacket as Jonathan leaned forward with his characteristic grin. "Harry, lovely to have you back on the show. You look well. You look happy," Jonathan began, his tone warm and welcoming. "Thank you for having me, Jonathan. Always a pleasure to be here," Harry replied, his smile genuine as he glanced toward the enthusiastic audience. The first few minutes proceeded exactly as expected. They discussed Harry's latest charitable initiatives, his love for polo, and even shared a few laughs about his notorious party days. The audience was engaged, Jonathan was in his element, and Harry seemed completely at ease. "Now, I have to ask," Jonathan continued, his eyes twinkling with that familiar look that suggested he was about to venture into more provocative territory. "Duties. Some people might say, that's a bit rich, coming from someone who then goes on television shows like this one. Well, Jonathan, there's a difference between choosing when to speak publicly about causes I care about and having every aspect of your private life scrutinized without consent. But surely you understand that public interest comes with the territory," Jonathan pressed, leaning forward slightly. "Your grandmother, your father, they've managed it for decades without complaining quite so publicly." The temperature in the room seemed to shift. Harry's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his voice remained controlled. "I think every generation has the right to approach their duties in their own way. The world has changed significantly since my grandmother took the throne." Jonathan chuckled, but there was an edge to it now. "Changed, yes, but surely the basic principles remain the same." "Personal feelings," Harry repeated slowly, his voice taking on a cooler tone. "Is that what you call wanting to protect your family from harassment?" The audience had gone notably quieter, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Jonathan, however, seemed energized by the growing tension, as if he'd found the thread he'd been looking for. "Well, let's talk about family then," Jonathan said, his grin widening. "Your brother William seems to have found a way to balance it all quite successfully. Different approaches, I suppose." Harry's hands clenched slightly on his knees. "My brother and I have different circumstances, Jonathan. I'd prefer not to make comparisons." "Oh, come on, Harry. Surely you can see how it looks from the outside. One brother quietly getting on with the job, the other making headlines for all the wrong reasons." The studio had fallen remarkably quiet. Even the camera operators seemed to sense they were witnessing something unusual unfolding. Harry's composure was clearly being tested, but he maintained his diplomatic facade. "I think that's a rather simplistic view of a complex situation," Harry replied, his voice steady but with an underlying steel that hadn't been there at the start of the interview. Jonathan leaned back, clearly enjoying himself. "Maybe it is simple, though. Maybe it really is just about doing your duty without all the drama." "Drama," Harry said, the word hanging in the air like a challenge. "Is that what you call trying to protect your wife and children from the kind of treatment that contributed to my mother's death?" The audience audibly gasped. To have provoked such a response, that's quite a leap, Harry. I mean, comparing your current situation to what happened to Diana, that's rather heavy, isn't it? Harry's eyes flashed dangerously. "Heavy? My mother was hounded to death by the press, and you think it's heavy for me to want to prevent history from repeating itself." She understood it was part of the job. She played the game. "The game," Harry repeated, his voice now openly hostile. "You call what killed my mother a game?" The tension was palpable now. Members of the audience were shifting uncomfortably. in their seats, clearly sensing they were witnessing something far beyond the usual celebrity interview. Jonathan, however, seemed completely in his element, as if this was exactly the kind of television he lived for. "Look, Harry, I'm just saying that perhaps if you approached things differently, with a bit more of the old British stiff upper lip, you might find life easier." Harry stood up abruptly, the sudden movement causing a collective intake of breath. From the audience, for a moment, he said nothing, just stared down at Jonathan with barely contained fury. The stiff upper lip that meant I couldn't grieve properly for my mother. The stiff upper lip that meant I had to walk behind her coffin while the world watched. That stiff upper lip, Jonathan. Jonathan, still seated, looked up at Harry with what could only be described as gleeful anticipation. Well, yes, I suppose. Duty first, personal feelings second. It served the monarchy well for centuries. Harry's hands were clenched into fists now. "You have absolutely no idea what you're talking about." "Oh, I think I do," Jonathan replied, his voice maddeningly calm. "I think I'm talking to someone who's forgotten what it means to serve something bigger than themselves." The words hung in the air like a slap. Harry's face had gone from diplomatic composure to something approaching rage in the span of seconds. The studio audience sat in stunned silence, many of them looking around as if wondering whether they should leave. Forgotten what it means to serve. Harry's voice was dangerously quiet now. "I served my country in Afghanistan, Jonathan. I've dedicated my life to helping veterans, supporting mental health causes, continuing my mother's work." "What exactly have you done besides sit in this chair and tear people down for entertainment?" Jonathan's grin only widened at the personal attack. "Ooh, touchy. But that's exactly what I'm talking about. Harry, the moment someone questions you, you get defensive, you lash out. Your grandmother would never react like this." "Leave my grandmother out of this," Harry snapped, taking a step closer to the desk that separated them. "But she's the perfect example, isn't she? Decades of service, never a complaint, never airing the family's dirty laundry in public. She understands what duty means." Harry's laugh was bitter and harsh. "You think she's never complained? You think she's never struggled with the pressure, the expectations? Just because she doesn't share her private moments with people like you, doesn't mean she's made of stone." "People like me," Jonathan feigned offense, placing the hand over his heart. "I'm just a talk show host asking the questions the public wants." Answered questions about why one prince can handle the pressure, while another, apparently, cannot. The comparison to William again, Harry's eyes blazed. "You don't know the first thing about what either of us can or cannot handle. Well, I can see what's happening right here, right now." Jonathan gestured broadly. "One question to many, and you're ready to storm off. Doesn't exactly scream fit for duty to me." Behind the cameras, producers were frantically whispering. To each other, this was either television gold or a complete disaster, and nobody seemed entirely sure which. The audience was riveted, many of them recording on their phones despite the studio's policies. "You want to talk about duty?" Harry's voice rose. "Let's talk about your duty as a journalist, to report facts instead of stirring up drama for ratings. Let's talk about your duty to treat your guests with basic human decency." "Oh, please," Jonathan scoffed. "You came on my show, Harry. You knew what this was. You knew I asked the difficult questions. That's what good television is. Good television." Harry was shouting now. "Exploiting people's pain is good television. Making entertainment out of family trauma is good television. If you can't handle the heat, stay out of the kitchen," Jonathan replied coolly. "Or in your case, stay out of the public eye entirely. Go live your quiet life somewhere, and stop expecting the rest of us to pretend your problems are more important than everyone else's." The audience gasped again. Several people were visibly uncomfortable, shifting in their seats and looking toward the exits. But nobody moved. The confrontation was too compelling, too raw to look away from. "My problems," Harry's voice cracked. Slightly. "My problems are that people like you turned my mother's death into entertainment. My problems are that you're doing the same thing to my family now, and somehow I'm the villain for trying to stop it. Your mother courted the press. When it suited her, Jonathan shot back. She played the victim when it didn't. And now you're doing exactly the same thing." The comment hit like a physical blow. Harry went completely still, his face draining of color before flushing red with fury. "How dare you?" he whispered, his voice shaking with rage. How dare you talk about my mother like that? I'm talking about her honestly, Jonathan replied, seemingly oblivious to the danger he was courting. Something your family seems incapable of doing. Always the sanitized version. Always the fairy tale. Never the complicated reality. The reality? Harry's voice was rising to a shout again. The reality is that she was killed by people like you who couldn't leave her alone. The reality is that she died trying to escape photographers who treated her like prey. She died in a car accident, Harry, a tragic accident, but let's not rewrite history to suit your narrative. The words were like gasoline on a fire. Harry lunged forward, only stopping when his hands hit the desk that separated them. Jonathan, to his credit, didn't flinch, though his eyes widened slightly at the sudden movement. My narrative, Harry, was leaning over the desk now, his face inches from Jonathan's. She was being chased by paparazzi, Jonathan. They were hunting her like an animal, and she died trying to get away from them. And whose fault was that? Jonathan asked quietly, his voice carrying easily in the now dead-silent studio. Who courted that attention in the first place? The question was too much. Harry straightened up, his whole body trembling with rage. You're blaming her? You're actually blaming my mother for her own death. I'm saying actions have consequences, Jonathan replied calmly. If you court publicity, you can't complain when it becomes inconvenient. Inconvenient? Harry's voice broke on the word. Her death was inconvenient. The audience was completely silent now, many of them looking genuinely disturbed by the direction the conversation had taken. In the control room, producers were debating whether to cut to commercial, but the ratings potential of what they were witnessing kept them frozen in indecision. That's not what I meant, and you know it, Jonathan said, though his tone suggested he wasn't particularly sorry for the misunderstanding. No, that's exactly what you meant, Harry replied, his voice now deadly quiet. You meant that she brought it on herself, that she deserved what happened to her. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Harry stepped back from the desk, his hand shaking. You've made it perfectly clear what you think, what people like you have always thought. People like me again, Jonathan sighed dramatically. You really can't help yourself, can you? Everyone who doesn't bow down to you is automatically the enemy. Bow down to me. Harry laughed, but there was no humor in it. I'm not asking anyone to bow down to me. Jonathan, I'm asking for basic human decency. I'm asking for people to remember that behind the titles and the headlines were actually human beings with feelings. Human beings, yes, but also public. Figures who chose this life. I didn't choose anything, Harry snapped. I was born into this. The only choice I've ever had is how to deal with it, and I choose to protect my family instead of feeding them to wolves like you. Jonathan's eyes lit up at the insult. Wolves like me. That's a bit rich coming from someone who's made millions criticizing his own family in public. I've never criticized my family, Harry protested. Haven't you? Jonathan leaned forward. Again, every time you talk about wanting privacy, every time you complain about the pressure, you're implicitly criticizing the institution your family represents. You're saying they've got it wrong. Maybe they have got it wrong. Harry shot back, the words escaping before he could stop them. The admission hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Harry's eyes widened as he realized what he'd just said, but it was too late to take it back. Jonathan's face lit up with the predatory glee of a shark sensing blood in the water. Did you just say your family has got it wrong? Jonathan's voice was silky smooth now, savoring every word. The institution that served Britain for over 1,000 years, and you think they've got it wrong? Harry's face went pale as he realized he'd walked straight into Jonathan's trap. That's not what I meant. Oh, I think it's exactly what you meant. Jonathan pressed on relentlessly. You think you know better than centuries of tradition. You think you're smarter than your grandmother, your father, your brother. Stop twisting my words, Harry said desperately, but his voice lacked conviction now. I'm not twisting anything. You said, maybe they've got it wrong. On live television, in front of millions of people. Jonathan was practically purring with satisfaction. Tell me, Harry, what exactly have they got wrong? The duty? The service? The sacrifice? Harry opened his mouth, then closed it again, clearly. Struggling to find words that wouldn't make things worse, the audience watched in horrified fascination as one of the most famous people in the world crumbled before their eyes. The sacrifice, Harry finally repeated, his voice hollow. You want to talk about sacrifice? What about the sacrifice of never being able to grieve properly? What about the sacrifice of having to pretend everything's fine when you're falling apart inside? Ah, so we're back to you being the victim, Jonathan said dismissively. Poor Harry, having to do his duty like everyone else in his family has done for generations. Like everyone else, Harry's composure finally snapped completely. You think my father grieved properly when his mother died? You think William doesn't struggle with the pressure? You think any of us are actually fine? The words came pouring out now, years of frustration and pain spilling over in front of the cameras. You want to know what they got wrong? They got wrong the idea that we have to suffer in silence. They got wrong the idea that duty means destroying yourself for appearances. They got wrong the idea that tradition is more important than mental health. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, looking like a cat with cream. So the entire royal family, the entire institution, they're all wrong, and you're right. I didn't say that, Harry protested weakly. You just did. You said they got it wrong about duty, about tradition, about mental health. You're essentially saying that everyone who came before you was doing it incorrectly. Harry ran his hands through his hair, clearly realizing how badly he'd lost control of the situation. You're putting words in my mouth. I'm repeating your words back to you, Jonathan countered smoothly. Would you like me to have the producers play back the tape? No, Harry said quickly, then seemed to realize how that sounded. I mean, that's not necessary, because you know exactly what you said, Jonathan continued mercilessly. You said, maybe they've got it wrong. About duty, about service, about everything your family stands for. The audience was completely transfixed. Now, several people were openly filming on their phones, despite the studio's rules. This wasn't just a celebrity interview gone wrong. This was history being made, and everyone in the room knew it. Look, Harry tried again, his voice desperate now. All I've ever wanted is to serve my country and protect my family. If that makes me the villain in your story, then so be it. Protecting your family by trashing the institution they belong to, Jonathan asked with mock confusion. Interesting approach. I'm not trashing anything, Harry snapped, but his protests sounded hollow even to himself, aren't you? You've just spent the last 10 minutes telling me how wrong they've got everything, how their approach to duty is destructive, how their traditions are harmful, how their way of handling grief is inadequate. Harry stared at Jonathan with something approaching hatred. You twisted everything I said. I didn't twist anything. I just kept asking questions and let you answer them. Jonathan's smile was triumphant now. The truth has a way of coming out, doesn't it? The truth. Harry's voice rose again. You want the truth? The truth is that people like you destroyed my mother, and now you're trying to destroy me. The truth is that you don't care about duty or service or anything else, except ratings and controversy. The truth, Jonathan replied calmly, is that you came on my show voluntarily, knowing exactly what kind of questions I ask, and now you're angry because you didn't like where the conversation went. Harry stood up abruptly, swaying slightly, as if the emotional toll of the interview had physically exhausted him. I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore. Oh, are you walking out? Jonathan asked with delighted surprise. How very dutiful of you. How very royal. The sarcasm was the final straw. Harry spun around, his face contorted with rage. You know what, Jonathan? You're right about one thing. I am walking out. Because sitting here listening to you mock my mother's memory and twist my words isn't duty, it's stupidity. Your mother's memory seems perfectly intact to me, Jonathan replied coolly. It's your judgment I'm questioning. Harry took a step toward Jonathan again, his fists clenched. For a moment, it looked like he might actually strike him. The audience gasped collectively, and several security guards moved closer to the set. That's enough, came a voice from off camera. The show's producer had stepped into view, his face grim. We're going to commercial. Actually, no, we're not, Jonathan said, never taking his eyes off Harry. This is live television, and our guest seems to have something more to say. Harry stared at Jonathan for a long moment, his chest rising and falling rapidly. When he finally spoke, his voice was deadly quiet. I have nothing more to say to you, ever. He turned to leave, but Jonathan couldn't resist one final shot. Give my regards to your family when you explain how you defended the monarchy tonight. Harry froze. Without turning around, he spoke in a voice that carried clearly throughout the silent studio. You're a parasite, Jonathan. You feed off other people's pain because you have nothing of value to offer yourself. My mother knew what you were, and so do I. Your mother also knew how to finish an interview, Jonathan called after him. That was it. Harry spun around, his face purple with rage, and for a moment it looked like all hell was about to break loose. But instead of charging at Jonathan, he simply stood there, trembling with fury, before finally speaking in a voice that was barely above a whisper. This interview is over. No, it's not, the producer said firmly, stepping fully into camera view now. Harry, I need you to leave the set immediately. Harry stared at the producer in shock. What? You're disrupting the show. You need to leave now. The audience erupted in shocked murmurs. Harry looked around the studio as if seeing it for the first time, his face a mixture of confusion and humiliation. Security will escort you out, the producer continued, gesturing to the guards who had moved closer. You're kicking me off? Harry's voice was incredulous. You've made it impossible to continue, the producer replied tersely. Harry looked at Jonathan, who was watching the proceedings with undisguised glee. Then, at the audience, many of whom were still filming everything on their phones. Finally, he looked directly into the main camera. This is what passes for journalism now, he said quietly. This is what my mother died for. And with that, he walked off the set, flanked by security guards, leaving behind a studio full of stunned silence and one very satisfied talk show host. Jonathan turned to the camera with his biggest smile of the night. Well, that was unexpected. We'll be right back after this break. But as the cameras continued to roll and the audience sat in shocked silence, it was clear that nothing would be quite the same again. The most explosive television interview in years had just ended with a member of the royal family being escorted off the set by security, and the whole world had watched it happen. So what do you think? Was Harry right to walk out, or should he have kept his composure no matter what? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories like this one.